They had anointed you to be the next great queen of the They had anointed you to be the next great queen of the Democratic Party establishment, and you threw that away.
Tulsi Gabbard, the Hawaii Democrat and DNC vice chair, disinvited from the Democratic debate,
has been at odds with her boss, DNC chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz, for months over the Democratic presidential debate schedule.
You were also quoted as saying, when I signed up to be vice chair of the DNC, no one told me I would be relinquishing my freedom of speech.
I am resigning from the DNC.
Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard sent shockwaves through the political world yesterday when she stepped down as vice chair of the Democratic National Committee.
I am truly honored to nominate Bernie Sanders for President of the United States.
I'm challenging the establishment, challenging the status quo.
Today, I announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America.
You have faced some really harsh criticism from fellow Democrats.
This war with Iran would be far more devastating than anything that we ever saw in Iraq.
Why were you the lone voice out there going after the neocons?
You won a number of online polls. She became the top trending candidate on Google.
She has reached well over the 130,000 individual donor threshold.
She's been dismissed and otherized by a media that seems unable to grapple with a servicewoman who dares question the bipartisan war consensus.
Tulsi Gabbard, who has 23 polls above 2%, and the DNC looking at that list and saying, yeah, but only one of these qualifies.
There is nothing more powerful than when we, the people, rise up united by our love for this country and our love for each other to bring about the kind of change in leadership that we need to bring.
As a vice chair of the DNC, I'm required to stay neutral in Democratic primaries, but I cannot remain neutral any longer. The stakes are just too high. That's why today I'm endorsing Senator Bernie Sanders to be our next President and Commander-in-Chief of the United States. Being a warrior is about believing in what you are fighting for and holding strong to those convictions. I felt a sense of duty, and I could not in good conscience stay back here in beautiful Hawaii and watch my brothers and sisters in uniform go off into combat. These are people and friends who we never forget and who we strive to honor every day that we are blessed to live and breathe. Bernie Sanders voted against the Iraq War. He understands the cost of war, that cost is continued when our veterans come home. Bernie Sanders will defend our country and take the trillions of dollars that are spent on these interventionist, regime change, unnecessary wars and invest it here at home. The American people are not looking to settle for inches. They're looking for real change. What I saw in Bernie was a heart of aloha. No matter who you are, where you come from in this country, that we are all in this together. My name is Tulsi Gabbard, and I support Bernie Sanders to be our next President and Commander-in-Chief.
I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
There are lessons to be learned from the past that are important for us to consider as we look at this choice that lies before us about who our next Commander-in-Chief will be. After 9/11 happened, I felt a sense of duty and wanted to do my part to be of service to our country. I could not in good conscience stay back here in beautiful Hawaii and watch my brothers and sisters in uniform go off into combat. These are people and friends who we never forget and who we strive to honor.
When we had our first memorial service in Iraq, when we had hundreds of soldiers from the Hawaii Army National Guard's 29th Brigade Combat Team gathered in a memorial service, we paid our respects to the empty boots, the empty helmet, and the rifle.
For those of us who have seen what the effects, what the consequences, and what the cost of war is the qualities of judgment and foresight in our commander-in-chief are paramount. Bernie Sanders voted against the Iraq War.
The question, Mr. Speaker, is not whether we like Saddam Hussein or not. The question is whether he represents an imminent threat to the American people and whether a unilateral American invasion of Iraq will do more harm than good.
Bernie Sanders will defend our country and take the trillions of dollars that are spent on these interventionist, regime change, unnecessary wars and invest it here at home.
I am concerned about the problems with so-called unintended consequences. Who will govern Iraq when Saddam Hussein is removed? And what role will the U.S. play in an ensuing civil war that could develop in that country? Will moderate governments in the region who have large Islamic fundamentalist populations be overthrown and replaced by extremists?
He has foresight when making these most critical decisions that affect us all about war or peace.
Hillary Clinton, who has shown through her record and her current positions that she will continue to take us down this road of interventionist regime change wars that have cost us far too much. And I cannot stand on the sidelines and do nothing when we have a clear choice that many people are not informed about. There are very stark differences between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that people know what those differences are so they can at least make an educated and informed decision. As I'm examining who should be our next commander-in-chief, is someone who exercises good judgment, someone who has foresight, and someone who has this military mindset, which means you take a look at a specific military course of action, and you analyze it carefully to really look at what will the consequences of that course of action be? How will our enemies react to that? What will our reaction to that be? And go through this process so we know exactly how things are likely to play out before that action is taken. And I know through my conversations with Senator Sanders and through his record that he does have that good judgment to make sure that we are no longer spending our precious resources and lives in these interventionist regime change wars, and instead use those resources to nation build and invest in our communities right here.
Who knows more about foreign policy than the former Secretary of State?
I'm glad you asked, and then that's the important question here, is a question of experience versus judgment. We could look to a lot of different places. We could look to Dick Cheney if we want to look for experience in foreign policy. But to me, the real question is judgment. And as a soldier, that's what I look for in my next commander-in-chief, is who will exercise good judgment, who will exercise foresight in looking to see when should we use America's military power, and just as importantly, when should we not use that power. And I'm confident that with Bernie Sanders, he will not take us into these interventionist regime change wars that have cost our country so dearly in American lives, in treasure, what to speak of the hundreds of thousands of lives that have been lost across the Middle East. And it's not just about Iraq, it's about what happened after that. It's about her decision as the architect and champion for the military overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya that resulted in a failed nation and chaos and loss of life and a stronger ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And now with the current war in Syria, where Secretary Clinton supports continuing this regime change interventionist war, Bernie Sanders opposes it and has promised to end it. She has promised to continue it and continue to escalate it with a no-fly zone without providing any details on exactly how many U.S. aircraft will be necessary to implement that no-fly zone. How will it be effective? How many U.S. ground troops will be required to enforce that so-called safe zone or no-fly zone? What will happen if a Russian plane, for example, violates that no-fly zone? There's so many questions on what she is proposing to do on this current day war in Syria that have yet to be answered. And I encourage you to ask her those questions in the debate that you're going to be moderating coming up in New York. I have serious issues with the track record and the positions that she's taken on, in particular as it relates to foreign policy, and the decisions that she has made that have cost our country trillions of dollars, that have cost our country thousands of lives, my brothers and sisters in uniform who I served with, who never made that trip home on that plane, whose families are still home, grieving the loss of their loved ones. There are very real consequences to this election. It's not just about a horse race or who's going to, pick up the most points. It is about the very real consequences of this decision that's before the American people, and why it's so important for us, all of us, the media, the American people, to really talk about and examine carefully what it is that she is proposing, what it is that Bernie Sanders is proposing, where are the differences in that, and what are the consequences of those positions that they've taken, in particular on these issues of war and peace. Is that what you will tell the parents of those two soldiers who were just killed in Afghanistan? Well, we just have to be engaged. As a soldier, I will tell you that answer is unacceptable. We have to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. We are in a place in Afghanistan where we have lost so many lives. We've spent so much money that's coming out of every one of our pockets, money that should be going into communities here at home, meeting the needs of the people here at home. We are no better off in Afghanistan today than we were when this war began. This is why it's so important to have a president and commander-in-chief who knows the cost of war and who's ready to do the job on day one. I am ready to do that job when I walk into the Oval Office. Thank you very much.
We have got to have some present there.
The Taliban was there long before we came in. They'll be there long before we leave.
Well,
we cannot keep U.S. troops deployed to Afghanistan thinking that we're going to somehow squash this Taliban that has been there, that every other country that's tried has failed. I didn't say squash them.
When we weren't in there, they started flying planes into our buildings. So I'm just saying right now,
the Taliban didn't attack us on 9/11. Al-Qaeda did.
Well, I understand.
Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11.
I understand.
That's why I and so many other people joined the military to go after Al-Qaeda, not the Taliban.
The Taliban was protecting those people who were plotting against us. All I'm saying is, if we want to go into elections and we want to say that we got to withdraw from the world, that's what President Trump is saying. We can't. I would love for us to.
Protecting Al-Qaeda right now in Saudi Arabia.
Now, you said that Harris leveled a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is racist. Can you tell us exactly what your issue is with how the senator is handling this?
Well, exactly what I said there. Levying this accusation that Joe Biden is racist when he's clearly not, as a way to try to smear him. And as you point to the article that I linked to in my tweet, really what she's saying is her position is the same one that she was criticizing Joe Biden for. So this is just a political ploy, and I think a very underhanded one, just to try to get herself attention, to move herself up in the polls. I think that we need to be above that, all of us.
Those are really kind of ancient debates for people who are around our age and younger. Did that seem like a fair discussion to you? And it obviously took up almost all of the oxygen that came out of the first two nights of the debate.
No, it didn't. But, I think I'll leave that battle to Biden and Harris. I think one of the things that I'm most concerned with is, Kamala Harris is not qualified to serve as commander-in-chief, and I can say this from a personal perspective as a soldier. She's got no background or experience in foreign policy, and she lacks the temperament that is necessary for a commander-in-chief. I've seen the cost of war firsthand. I've experienced the consequences of what happens when we have presidents, as we have, from both political parties in the White House, who lack experience, who lack that foreign policy understanding, who therefore fall under the influence of the foreign policy establishment, the military-industrial complex. This is what's so dangerous. This is what we've seen occurring over time. If you look at the wasteful regime change wars that have been waged in countries like Iraq, Libya, Syria, there are so many different examples. These are wasteful wars that have strengthened terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, therefore making the American people less safe.
So the core of this problem is the fact that big insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies who've been profiting off the backs of sick people have had a seat at the table writing this legislation. Now, Kamala Harris just talked about Kathleen Sebelius, who helped write her bill. This just pointed to the fatal flaw in her proposal. Sebelius works for Medicare Advantage, private insurance company who will stand to profit under her plan. If we're seeking to really reform our healthcare system, we've got to shut out big insurance and big pharma out of the drafting process so they cannot continue to profit off the backs of the sick people in this country who are searching and in desperate need of care. I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. That would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way. The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you were in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology. First of all, what I was sharing was not a matter of opinion. These are widely reported facts and reports about her tenure as Attorney General in California, her career as a prosecutor. And we're not talking about something that happened, 30 years ago or 50 years ago. These are things that she did in her last job, just before she was elected as U.S. Senator, and she should be held to account for them. She's claimed to be very proud of this record, so answer for it. The voters deserve to know. But you're right. She refused to answer the question. She refused to engage on the debate stage, and the responses from her and her campaign after the debate was basically to lob cheap smears and basically say that I'm a traitor or a foreign agent or a Trojan horse or whatever it was, and trying to feed those talking points to the media. So, this is concerning on many levels about how a Senator Harris would govern as president. That if there are those who are critics of her or her record, for me, I'm a two-time veteran of Middle East deployments. I'm a soldier currently still serving in the Army. I'm a sitting member of Congress, and she's smearing me in this way. Imagine what she would do to anyone else, as president. Look, I want to break this down to what we're talking about. It's really a yes or no answer. I want to break this down to what we're talking about here today, because you're talking about a meeting that took place, 3 years ago?
Well, Congresswoman,
and every time I come back here on MSNBC, you guys talk to me about these issues. It sounds like these are talking points that Kamala Harris and her campaign are feeding you because she's refusing to address the questions that were posed to her.
I think, for the American people to have context about your foreign policy issues and where you stand. If you're leading with foreign policy and you're running for the President of the United States, a meeting with Bashar al-Assad, which I'm sure you understand, is a very controversial meeting to take. Hence the reason why when you come on MSNBC, it is important for us to talk to you about that. And of course, every anchor has a different perspective and different questions to ask of you.
Every single time for 3 years. This is where the propaganda comes in, because I've talked about this a lot for the last 3 years, and I've talked about how as a soldier, I served in a field medical unit in Iraq, where every single day I saw the very high human cost of war. Every single day, the first thing that I did was go through a list name by name of every single American casualty and injury that had occurred the day before. So I will not apologize to you or to anyone for doing all that I... Let me finish. Okay. For doing all that I can to prevent our country from continuing to make these perpetual wrong decisions that have taken a toll on the lives of my brothers and sisters in uniform. I will continue to do all that I can to make sure that we end these wasteful regime change wars that have taken such a toll on all of us and that have made our country less safe. And if that means having a meeting with a dictator, if that means trying to meet with Kim Jong-un in North Korea to de-escalate tensions and remove this nuclear threat from our country and our people. Whatever the crisis is, we've got to have a leader with the courage to do the right thing for the American people, putting their interests ahead of everything else. That is what I'm focused on. And that's what's at the center of my foreign policy and the leadership that I'll bring as president.
Like so many of you, it is painful and disheartening to see how much divisiveness is being fomented by those who wish to tear us apart. We have people in positions of power who are not thinking about the well-being of the people and our planet. Where is that conversation about the needs of our people? Where is the conversation about peace? Every time we launch these interventionist regime change wars, it is not only our veterans who pay the price for that. Every single one of us pays the price. We have spent trillions of your taxpayer dollars to pay for these wars, taking those dollars away from our communities and our people who need them right here at home. We are the ones who have the power to make change. It takes every single one of our hands, our hearts, and our voices, motivated by this love and aloha, to take on those forces and those obstacles that can seem too great to overcome. There is no force more powerful than love. This is how we come together as Americans. This is why we fight for the future that we hope will be so much brighter for those that we care about, for the country that we love. You will do anything to fight for them. When you love something, you will go to the end of the earth to fight for it. Love gives us strength. Love gives us courage. Love gives us what we need to overcome those forces of darkness. First of all, my goal has never been to be queen of the Democratic establishment. No. Never once entered my brain. So let's just put that one aside.
It wasn't that tempting in the first place? Okay.
It comes back to doing what's right.
Why do you think that was right?
Doing what I believe is right.
What was right about that?
In that election, I was a vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, something that I was surprised to be asked to do just a few weeks after I got elected. But went in trying to make a positive impact. But in that position, you're supposed to remain neutral in primaries, Democratic primaries. But as the primary election kicked off in 2016, I saw very quickly that I could not stand silently on the sidelines as a veteran when I saw that the issues of war and peace, the issue of the cost of war, was not being brought forward in this most important decision about who our next commander-in-chief would be. There were very stark differences between Secretary Clinton and Bernie Sanders on this issue, and ultimately that was the main reason why I resigned and left that position and endorsed Bernie Sanders, to bring forward what those contrasts were so people could make an educated choice. So we are facing a very direct nuclear threat from North Korea. Well, I've been talking about the seriousness of this threat for years, and I've been calling on President Trump, work out the differences so that we can build a pathway towards denuclearization. There's a few things that have to happen in order for those negotiations to be successful. First of all, they have to happen without preconditions. The second issue is understanding why North Korea has developed and is holding on so tightly to these nuclear weapons. Because they see it as the only deterrent against the U.S. coming in and overthrowing the regime there. They see how the United States in Libya, for example, guaranteed Gaddafi, we're not going to go after you, you should get rid of your nuclear weapons. He did, then we went and led an attack that toppled Gaddafi. North Korea is now in a position where Kim Jong-un is saying, no way, I'm not going to give up these nuclear weapons, because he doesn't see that credible message coming from the United States that we're not interested in overthrowing your government. We're interested in removing this nuclear threat from our country and the world. I am not someone who is going to go into the White House and sit back and rely on the foreign policy establishment in Washington to tell me what to do. I don't have to. That is what differentiates me from every other candidate who's running for president right now, is because I'm walking in on day one with that experience, both as a soldier directly, but also as a member of Congress who served on the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs committees for years, who's engaged with leaders of other countries, who
who's held the feet to the fire of people like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm not intimidated by the stars that someone wears on their shoulders. I'm not intimidated by the military-industrial complex and what they're pushing for. I'm not running for president to be president. I'm running for president to be able to bring about this sea change in our foreign policy that is so necessary for us and for the world, and I'm most qualified. Now, if you look at people in Washington say, well, look, there's just not enough money. There's just not enough money to make sure that people have clean water to drink. There's just not enough money to make sure that our roads are safe to drive on, that our bridges are not going to fail us. There's just not enough money. But these are the very same people who continue to vote for and to advocate for spending trillions of dollars on wasteful regime change wars or nuclear weapons that make us less safe, that increase suffering in the people in the countries where we wage these wars, that strengthen terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, undermining our own national security, what to speak of the cost that is borne by our men and women in uniform. So you ask what I will change. I will change our priorities in this country and set them right so we stop wasting trillions of all of our dollars on these wasteful, counterproductive wars and dedicate them to rebuilding our infrastructure, to taking care of these urgent needs that we have in communities all across this country. You will hear a lot of empty promises from politicians about all of the great things that they want to do for you. But unless you have someone in the White House who has that courage and that experience and leadership to bring about that change so that we are taking those trillions of dollars and bringing them here, then those promises will remain empty and unfulfilled. Because I'm not walking in like many others would without that depth of understanding, without that solid foundation of conviction of knowing exactly what's at stake and what we're fighting for. I will not walk into that White House and bow to the wishes of the foreign policy establishment or any general officer with the stars shining on their shoulder, because I know who I'm fighting for. I know who I'm serving. And frankly, this is why this very establishment is fighting so hard to try to undermine our campaign. But it's also why I have hope, because the vast majority of people in this country know and understand what I know about how urgent it is for us to shift our priorities, to make these changes, to end these costly wars and focus on how we can best serve the people and put their interests first. What's important to recognize, and that I've seen as I've spent the last several months out visiting different communities and hearing from people across the country, they're not asking about the Mueller investigation. They're not asking about what's happening with Attorney General Barr. They're asking, what are you going to do to make it so that my sick child can get the health care that he needs? What are you going to do to make it so that our teachers who are working hard every single day are able to get the pay and the basic tools that they need to give our kids a quality education? What are you going to do to make it so that we are investing in infrastructure so that we have clean water to drink? Every American has clean water to drink and clean air to breathe in this country. People are being poisoned right now, today, in places like Flint, Michigan, in communities in New Hampshire, in communities in Iowa, communities across the country because of our crumbling infrastructure and contaminated, polluted water. These are the issues that we need to be addressing here in Congress, working together to bring about real results and making those investments in our people and our communities that they so sorely need. What we're talking about is our objective, making sure that every single sick American in this country is able to get the health care that they need. I believe Medicare for All is the way to do that. I also think that employers will recognize how much money will be saved by supporting a Medicare for All program, a program that will reduce the administrative costs, reduce the bureaucratic costs, and make sure that everyone gets that
quality health care that they need. I also think if you look at other countries in the world who have universal health care, every one of them has some form of a role of private insurance. I think that's what we've got to look at, taking the best of these ideas, but making sure unequivocally that no sick American goes without getting the care that they need, regardless of how much or little money they have in their pocket.
I mean, I'll just tell you what happened. I went to Syria to meet with Syrian people, to hear for myself from them about what was happening there. While there, I was offered the invitation to meet with the president of Syria, and I took it because I think it's important for us to have the courage to meet with leaders, whether they be friends or adversaries or potential adversaries, if our focus is on national security and on peace. So I went and I had that meeting and I asked some tough questions and heard from him his perspective on what was happening and what he was doing in his country, and took the opportunity while there to meet with religious leaders, college students, members of the political opposition, small business owners, women who are working to start their own business to empower other women, Shia, Sunnis, Muslims, Christians, Catholics, people of all different religions. It is because of that and that meeting and my staunch opposition to regime change wars in Syria and in other countries that political opponents and others have chosen to try to smear me, my reputation, and my campaign, and to label me, as you said, she's a supporter of this dictator. Well, if that's true, then anyone who opposed the Iraq War is a Saddam Hussein lover. President Obama, when he first ran for president in 2008, when he caused some controversy at that time, saying, yes, he would meet with the leader of Iran without preconditions, that he would meet with leaders of other countries in that pursuit of national security and peace.
Yeah.
So why the double standard here that, okay, so in order to keep our country safe, in order to achieve peace, we're only going to meet with our friends and people who we agree with. That's not how you accomplish that mission. That's not how you accomplish security and peace. It doesn't make sense.
No, we don't want to send our sons and daughters over there to go do that. Now, if I put my tinfoil hat on,
we don't. We, the American people,
Yes.
don't. But this is the problem, and this is something that I realized very quickly during my first deployment to Iraq, where I was seeing firsthand the cost of war, serving in that medical unit every single day, and I wondered how many politicians in Washington who voted for, or advocated for, or championed that war in Iraq were laying awake at night, thinking about my brothers and sisters who were getting killed in combat, who were getting severely wounded, were getting blown up by IEDs. And I learned very quickly that they were not. They weren't thinking about the real cost and the ramifications and the consequences of their decisions.
That's one thing that you have over them for sure, is that you understand from firsthand experience and sacrifice what it means to actually be in war and to be in combat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I still serve in the Army National Guard now over 16 years. I've deployed twice to the Middle East, and coupled with my experience in Congress, serving over 6 years on the Foreign Affairs and the Armed Services Committees, working intimately on these issues related to national security and our foreign policy, meeting with leaders of different countries in the world. It is these experiences and the understanding that I've gained from them that best equip me to walk into the Oval Office on day one, ready to do the job of president and, most importantly, commander-in-chief. Yeah.
This role of being the person that is in control of this country has always been this impossible task. And when I see a person like you who wants to do it, I say, listen, you have some of the best ideas and the most healthy perspective that I've ever heard from anyone that's ever running for president. But why would you want to do that to yourself? Those are the two things that I think of.
Because it's not for myself. And it's not to be in control of the country and the people. It's to serve the people and our country. it's a continuation of this mission that I've chosen for my life, to be of service, to find different ways to do that. You know, it started in Hawaii with gathering my friends as a kid and going and picking up trash off the beach on the weekends, and experiencing even then at a young age that made me happier than anything else, than, you know, going and playing video games with my friends or anything like that. And that mission that was deeply ingrained in me further with my service in the military, serving as a soldier, where, you know, I'm serving alongside people of all walks of life, as you know, every race, religion, ethnicity, orientation, everything, every one of us wearing that same uniform, serving that same flag that represents the American people, with that laser-like focus on putting service above self. And that's what I seek to bring to the White House, to restore those values of integrity and honor and respect, to make it so that White House is a beacon of light for the American people, to know that White House belongs to them and represents them and their interests and their interests alone. Just like we go to the doctor for a checkup, similarly, we need to go for a mental health checkup, just like we need treatment if we've got a wound or an open wound or broken bone or whatever physically. Sometimes we need that mental health treatment to be able to get us to where we need to be. It breaks my heart to see, and I know people who I've served with. One of my soldiers during my second deployment, deployed many times, came home and eventually lost that battle here at home and took his own life. So this hits close to home, and why it's so important for us to deal with this stigma and to dedicate whatever resources are necessary to be able to make sure that there are providers like you who are available at that moment when our veterans ask for help. When they ask for help, they can't run through bureaucracies. They can't be told no. They can't get a voicemail on the phone and say, call back the next day, because the next day may be too late. Thank you. Impeachment is driven by these hyper-partisan interests. It will only further divide an already terribly divided country. Unfortunately, this is what we've already seen play out, as calls for impeachment really began shortly after Trump won his election. And as unhappy as that may make us as Democrats, he won that election in 2016. New York Times and CNN have also smeared veterans like myself for calling for an end to this regime change war. Just 2 days ago, the New York Times put out an article saying that I'm a Russian asset and an Assad apologist and all these different smears. This morning, a CNN commentator said on national television that I'm an asset of Russia. Completely despicable. And I would make sure that we stop supporting terrorists like al-Qaeda in Syria, who've been the ground force in this ongoing regime change war. I'd like to ask Senator Warren if she would join me in calling for an end to this regime change war in Syria, finally. So really what you're saying, Mayor Pete, is that you would continue to support having U.S. troops in Syria for an indefinite period of time to continue this regime change war that has caused so many refugees to flee Syria, that you would continue to have our country involved in a war that has undermined our national security. You would continue this policy of the U.S. actually providing arms and support to terrorist groups in Syria like al-Qaeda, HTS, al-Nusra, and others, because they are the ones who have been the ground force in this regime change war. That's really what you're saying. I agree with Hillary Clinton on one thing, disagree with her on many others, but when she said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, I think she's correct. I do, however, think that there should be some restrictions in place. I support codifying Roe v. Wade while making sure that during the third trimester, abortion is not an option unless the life or severe health consequences of a woman are at risk. It's not fair to ask these three about their health and their fitness to serve as president, but not every other one of us. Here's the real question I believe you should be asking is, who is fit to serve as our commander-in-chief? This is the most important responsibility that the president has, bringing the experience that I have. both serving in Congress now for nearly 7 years, serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee, serving on the Armed Services Committee, subcommittees related to terrorism and upcoming threats, serving on the Homeland Security Committee, the experience that I have as a soldier, serving for over 16 years in the Army National Guard, deploying twice to the Middle East, being able to serve in different capacities, joint training exercises, training the Kuwait National Guard. I understand the importance of our national security. I am prepared to do this job, to fulfill this responsibility as Commander-in-Chief on day one. I'd like to ask our other candidates this question. I'd like to start with Senator Warren. What her experience and background is.
I'm sorry, thank you. We're going to take another break now. The CNN New York Times debate. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
I love our country. It's why I enlisted after 9/11. I've served as a soldier for over 16 years, deployed twice to the Middle East, and serve in Congress now for almost 7 years. This is also why it makes me so furious, truly furious, when we, as the most prosperous nation in history, responsible for 25% of the world's GDP, have leaders that look us straight in the eye and tell us there's just not enough money for better health care. There's just no money to make sure that our teachers are paid properly. There's just no money to invest in protecting our environment and making sure that we have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. And this makes me so angry because it is all a lie. Now, before you go off and assume, hey, she's just another Democrat in favor of unlimited spending with no regard for where that money comes from or how we pay for things, let me just say that's not the case. Our national debt is something that we all need to take seriously. And the fact is, both parties have been reckless in allowing our debt to reach what it is now. But why I know that this is all a lie is because every month, every single month, this country is spending $4 billion on a war in Afghanistan, a war that was started in 2001, and by the end of this year, almost 20 years later, we will have spent roughly $1 trillion of our hard-earned taxpayer dollars on this wasteful, counterproductive war that's achieved nothing and has undermined our national security with no end in sight. So let me ask you this: how have the lives of the American people been improved by this war? Our wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria have cost we, the taxpayers, over $6 trillion. Why is nobody talking about this? Why have I been repeatedly attacked for sounding this alarm and calling for an end to these stupid wars? As your president and commander-in-chief, I will end this policy that wastes trillions of your hard-earned taxpayer dollars while making us less safe. I know the cost of war firsthand. I'll make sure every single one of our veterans is treated with the care and respect that they have earned through their great service and sacrifice. As an American who loves the ideals enshrined in our Constitution and Bill of Rights, I will fight to protect every single one of these rights and freedoms that we all hold so dear. Now, while many of my fellow candidates will attempt to make this upcoming election all about Donald Trump, it's not really about him. It's about we, the people. It's about creating a brighter future for our country while never losing sight of the values and principles that truly make our country great. I'm Tulsi Gabbard, and I'm running for president. I'm asking you for your support. You might have heard that I'm suing Google. Not just for what they did to my campaign, but it's because of what we're seeing growing at an alarming trend where these big tech monopolies are directly infringing on our public discourse and really on our fair elections. Because if they can shut down my Google ad account during that first debate when I was the most Googled candidate of the night, if they can do that to a sitting member of Congress running for the highest office of the land, they can do that to anyone running for any office anywhere or any person who is speaking with a voice that they may disagree with. I've been really intrigued by some of the responses we've gotten from this lawsuit, from the chattering class, from some quote-unquote progressive voices. They say, oh, well, she's just trying to grab headlines. And from some conservative voices saying, finally, someone's standing up for freedom of speech. Why the disparity here? We as as a country cannot afford to only stand up and fight for our freedoms when we are the targets. But when someone else is the target, we turn our backs and walk away. This is a danger to all of us. This is a danger to all of us. Can you imagine if Google's CEO was a conservative Republican who was shutting down Democrat voices that they disagreed with? Can you imagine how up in arms progressives would be if it were their voices being shut down? Now, we can disagree with each other, but I will tell you as a soldier that I'm willing to lay my life down to protect the rights and freedoms of every person in this country to speak their voice and make sure that voice is heard. So if you look back to when that vote on the Iraq War happened, and you looked at the very few who were brave to vote against that war at that time because they saw the truth, they were criticized and smeared as people who hated America. They were criticized and smeared as people who loved Saddam Hussein. It's easy for politicians now to say, well, of course the Iraq War was wrong. Of course I would have voted against the Iraq War, but none of them are saying what they will do right now about the regime change wars that are happening today, like the one happening in Syria. These are the same kinds of people who will wait and in 10 or 20 years say, oh, well, of course we should not be waging a regime change war in Syria. What we need is leadership. Leadership with courage to recognize and understand the right thing at the right time, to be able to make that change that I'm seeking to bring about, to prevent more senseless loss of life, to prevent more of this devastating cost to our people and to our country, and instead make sure that we are using our limited resources and investing in serving the needs of our people.
Bring it home.
That's what it is. It's about focusing on our people and our planet and actually being that force for good that we can and we should be in the world. This comes down to leadership. Leadership that has the strength and courage to stand up to the foreign policy establishment, to stand up to the media that plays right into their narrative, to stand up to the military-industrial complex that profits from these continued regime change wars, and to do the right thing for our people. It's about having the strength and courage and the focus on what is most important and who is most important. And it is every one of you that is most important. It is every person in this country that is most important. Not people who are looking out for their own profits, or politicians looking out for how they can line their pockets when they leave office. It's about you. It's about our home. It's about our planet. It's about us coming together and fighting for our future, making sure that we have one.
The recent arrest of a grandmother for possession of CBD oil, a resin from the cannabis plant that's used to treat arthritis and other ailments, underscores the absurdity and hypocrisy of federal laws related to marijuana. So while grandma is getting arrested for possessing medicine that contains CBD oil, Americans are still being prescribed highly addictive opioids, even when a non-addictive painkiller would be enough. I've introduced a bill in Congress that would end the federal marijuana prohibition. And as president, I'll remove marijuana-related convictions from the records of otherwise law-abiding Americans. But to get to the root of the opioid crisis, Congress needs to pass my bill, the Opioid Crisis Accountability Act, that would hold pharmaceutical companies accountable for their deceptive and illegal marketing and distribution of opioid drugs. As president, I will make sure that those responsible for this opioid epidemic are held accountable. The big pharmaceutical companies that callously lie and market a drug that they know is highly addictive just to increase their profits
will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Ending regime change wars is often, unfortunately, mistaken as being an isolationist, but this speaks to the problem, I think, with the mindset that some folks have, saying, well, if we're not bombing other countries, or if we're not levying crippling economic sanctions, then we must be turning our back on the world. When what I'm saying is we have to end these wasteful wars that are costing us as taxpayers so much money, that are coming out of our schools, out of our hospitals, out of our communities, and instead invest here at home and be leaders in the world and be a force for good.
Yes.
Build relationships on cooperation rather than running around with a stick.
Why is it that leaders in Washington are not taking climate change seriously? Not being serious about actually transitioning our country off of fossil fuels, taking the nearly $30 billion taxpayer dollars every single year that we give away to big oil, and take every penny of that and instead invest it in clean, renewable energy. Why is that not happening? Why is that not happening? It's because of this influence of corporate special interests in Washington over politicians who care more about their lobbyist friends or their own careers than they do about the well-being of the people and our planet. I'll tackle climate change by ushering in a green century, ending taxpayer subsidies to big fossil fuel giants and multinational agribusiness, ban offshore drilling, protect our environment, and harness technology, harness the innovation that we have to create jobs and renewable energy, provide better opportunities for our farmers to make a good living, and make sure every American has clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. I want to bring up the issue of religion because it is one that we have seen for too long, and we continue to see being used to foment bigotry and elicit fears and suspicions in people because of someone who holds a religion that may be different from the most. We see this in politics all the time. President John F. Kennedy went through this test when he ran for president, where people questioned how his Catholic faith would drive and influence his policies.
I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president, who happens also to be a Catholic. Whatever issue may come before me as president, if I should be elected, I will make my decision in accordance with what my conscience tells me to be in the national interest.
I took my oath of office on the Bhagavad Gita when I was first sworn into Congress in 2012. I'm a practicing Hindu, and my spiritual practice, my relationship with God, is something that is near and dear to my heart. Whether it is Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, atheists, whatever the path that people have chosen for their lives, it is important that every one of us stand up, call out, and condemn those who are seeking to incite bigotry based on religion and not allow them to try to use that to divide us, because that's not who we are in this country of freedom. We saw devastatingly the impact of that in Pittsburgh with the shooting at the synagogue. This is what happens when this is allowed to continue without being condemned and stopped. This is where the result ends up.
Authorities just revealed the names of the 11 victims, ranging in age from 97 to 54.
With people being shot and killed in their place of worship. We cannot allow that to happen to those who may share our faith or those who may have a different faith.
Today I may be the victim, but tomorrow it may be you. Until the whole fabric of our harmonious society is ripped apart at a time of great national peril.
So as we stand for peace abroad, we have to stand for peace and freedom here at home amongst our brothers and sisters, and recognize that interconnectedness, and that we have to stand and speak as one.
There were multiple systematic efforts to interfere in our election.
We don't have a secure election system in this country. We shouldn't pretend that we do.
The Russians were responsible for hacking.
We know they interfere with our elections.
Cyber attacks against voting infrastructure, along with computer intrusions.
And still there's been no legislation passed. Congress refuses to take action, which begs the question, are they more interested in just talk or actually solving the problem? The real threat to our democracy that we're facing right now is the vulnerabilities that exist within our elections infrastructure.
Hackers were able to penetrate a touchscreen voting machine in less than 2 hours.
I've introduced legislation called the Securing America's Elections Act. Very simply, my bill says that every single state will have paper ballots or a voter-verified paper backup to make sure that if anyone, whether it's a bad actor, an individual, or a country, comes in and tries to manipulate our votes, 100% we have an auditable paper trail.
Russia is continuing its attempts to meddle in U.S. elections.
Rogue political campaigns are not likely to go away in the near future.
We must act now to secure our elections and renew our citizens' faith in the integrity of those elections.
U.S. officials charged WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange with violating the Espionage Act on Thursday.
Charging Assange under the Espionage Act will have a serious chilling effect on our most fundamental rights of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Every American, certainly every journalist, must strongly condemn this anti-democratic act by the Trump administration. I've seen the cost of war. When I came home, I promised to fight for peace, standing up to the most powerful, meeting with both friends and adversaries. Peace gives us a chance for a bright future. And that's why I'll never stop fighting for peace. There's no more rewarding path in life than to dedicate oneself into the service of others. Service above self. I find great inspiration from a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, when he said, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And I can tell you from my line of work that this principle of service above self, unfortunately, is lacking in far too many of our leaders in this country and is the cause of many of the challenges that we face, where we have people in great positions of power and influence, yes, in government, but also in business and in healthcare, on Wall Street, across the board, who put their own interests ahead of the interests of the people. Instead, what we need most are servant leaders, using their platform and skills and energy towards making a positive impact on our people and our planet. It starts with every single one of us to be that example, to inspire others, to be the change that you wish to see in the world, and to each in our own way bring this culture of servant leadership to every community, to every part of our society. And by doing so together, this is how we light the way forward towards a better and brighter future for all.
Hoping and praying that you will be the one person who will make the change, who will bring the change, who will be the voice for the voiceless, who will be the person who can say that the war that we start here, the billions of dollars that we are spending on this war can go to our addicts, to the mental health, to our healthcare here in the States. People are dying of poverty. And yet people are dying of poverty in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in parts of Africa, because we have started those wars. Tulsi, how are you going to fight your own party, our own Democrats? How?
Yes, you speak for so many whose voices are not being heard. You have just laid out why I'm running for president. This is not a political ambition that I have had for myself. with the obstacles that are in place and the challenges that exist, it is because of the people that you're talking about, people whose lives are being impacted, that make me work tirelessly to run for president to bring about this change. We're not naive to the challenges that lay before us, or the obstacles that are placed ahead of us, or the smear tactics that are used against us. Yes, it's coming from within our own party. The most attacks I get are not from Republicans. They're from Democrats. They're from people in the mainstream media. They are from people in the foreign policy establishment that you're talking about, people who represent the interests of the military-industrial complex. But you know what? You know what? The answer to how we overcome this, it's us. It's we the people. The stronger they come, the stronger we respond. And you know what? We don't respond to their dirty tactics or their hate with more hate. We respond with strength and love and our message of peace and humanity. We cannot lose faith in the power that we hold within our own hands, our own feet, our own voices, and our hearts. It is only when we reclaim our own voices and our own power in dictating the change in this country that we need to make that we can be successful. People will get into a lot of conversations about political tactics and how do we win this race and who's going to beat Donald Trump. Bluntly, and I might get in trouble for saying this, what does it matter if we beat Donald Trump if we end up with someone who will perpetuate the very same crony capitalist policies, corporate policies, and waging more of these costly wars? This is why I'm running for president. This is not a joke. This is not for fun. This is not about me. It's about all of us. It's about our future. Making sure that we have one.